To anyone listening, go out, live your dreams, and, have no regrets. So I was carrying so much gear and it was so overloaded and so heavy. So every time I put the bike down, and when I got to Tunisia, which is a neighboring country, they said to me, just don't go to Libya because, pretty much you're going to die.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Motorcycle Adventures podcast. My name is John and this is episode 56. Today on the show, Jo Rust, the very first woman to ride around Africa solo. She's a world record holder, author, and KTM brand ambassador, so you don't want to miss this one. Just a couple things before we get into this show. Listeners, if this is your first time hearing our podcast, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. That really helps us out. Climb the iTunes rankings, so on and so forth. Don't forget about our social media channels at Ben Motorcycle Adventures on both Facebook, Instagram, and we're also on YouTube. Jo Rust, our guest today, is also on Instagram at jo.rust, and that is jo.rust. She's also got a YouTube channel, so make sure you support her. And without further ado, let's get into the interview, episode 56 with Jo Rust. I was going to open with another question, but I literally just got off Skype with Harold from Giant Loop, and he was telling me how... Are you familiar?
Yeah.
So he was telling me how great the riding in South Africa is. Can you confirm that for us?
Absolutely. It's known as the adventure capital of the world. I don't know if you knew that.
I didn't.
Yeah. We have some awesome riding.
Yeah, so for us adventure riders, what's the terrain like?
So we have a lot of dirt roads. I think, I'm going to be spitballing if I have to say what percentage of the country is dirt roads, but let's say about 70% of the country we have dirt roads. We have a lot of awesome gravel dirt passes, like mountain passes, anything ranging from easy dirt to as technical as you want to go.
Okay, perfect. That's what we like. So for my big question, for those who aren't familiar with you, first woman to ride alone around Africa, then you wrote a book about it. My question is, which one was harder, completing the ride or writing the book?
Definitely the book.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, the book took a lot more. I don't know. It was a lot harder writing the book because it was literally sitting down every day, and writing because I wrote it myself. So, and I'm not used to that. I wouldn't say that I'm a writer. So it took, a lot of discipline.
Okay, so I was able to purchase the book on Amazon, and I would encourage everyone to do that also, but I have not been able to read it yet. But my assumption is that this is a recap of your travels and your experiences riding around Africa, correct?
That's correct, yeah. So it's a little like a semi-autobiography and a lot of detail of my trip around the continent, with detail about what documentation I needed, detail on the bike I used, the tools I used, the gear I used, and the route that I was on.
So some specifics there, almost kind of a portion of it would be a how-to, how you did it, what you carried, so on and so forth.
Yeah, exactly. So it's from how it all started out and leading up to my actually doing the entire trip. Because, originally the idea was to go around on a bicycle, which didn't work out. Which didn't work out because I got robbed in Angola, which is like 2 countries north from South Africa. And
hey listeners, my deepest apologies here, but Jo and I actually had our call disconnected at this point. We were able to reconnect just a minute or two later, so we'll pick up the conversation from there. Again, I apologize for any inconveniences. Yeah, so we left off As if riding a motorcycle around Africa not crazy enough, you were going to do it on a bicycle. That's where we left off.
Yeah, so what I was saying is that what happened was that I got robbed in a country called Angola, which is like two countries up north from South Africa. And, thankfully, I then discovered the internal combustion engine, which is so much easier. So then I started over again on a motorcycle.
Okay, so back to the bicycle. Where did the idea come from to decide that you were going to ride around the continent on one?
Well, you see, I grew up on bicycles, and I'd done a lot of cycling in my life, and the idea started out wanting to set the world record as the first woman to go around Africa. And I decided to do it on a bicycle because, well, it was simply the cheapest, easiest way for me to do it. And then I started out with cycling through South Africa, then around South Africa, just to raise some funds and get awareness going. And then I started with cycling around the continent, which then came to an end 3 months later. But then I came back and started over on a motorcycle.
Okay, and if I'm not mistaken, you always correct me if I'm wrong, but when you started the journey on the motorcycle, you didn't have a ton of experience riding, did you?
No, I'd never ridden a motorcycle before. I literally had to learn how to ride a motorcycle, and I bought a motorcycle. I went online and read on overlanding and adventure forums what motorcycles other people were using, and ended up buying a BMW F650 GS Dakar. And 2 weeks later, I got my license, and off I went.
Well, that's one way. That's one way to learn, right? You either sink or swim.
Yeah, I seem to like to throw myself in the deep end.
For sure. Now, starting out on the journey, did you encounter any hardships or struggles? Just kind of, really learning how to ride the bike and make your way.
There were a couple of struggles. Number one, I was way overloaded, which I think is a rookie mistake that a lot of people make. So I was carrying so much gear, and it was so overloaded and so heavy. So every time I put the bike down, I had to, unpack, pick the bike up, repack everything. So that there's that aspect. And then, riding through thick sand, because there's a lot of areas on the continent where it's, thick sand for kilometers, well, days on end. So that was another aspect that was very challenging. And then just from a security point of view, there were a couple of, only three instances where I ran into some trouble. Like in my book as well, the focus is more on the positive, because there were way more positive experiences than the few, how should I say, not so enjoyable experiences.
Okay. I want to dig into some of the details of the ride in a minute, but how many miles did you ultimately end up riding, and how long did it take you to become the first woman to ride around Africa?
So it was a year in total. A year of riding through 28 countries, and it was what is 45,000 kilometers to miles? It's about 28,000 miles.
Okay, no small feat.
Yeah.
Is it safe to assume, now you mentioned that South Africa may be 70 to 80% dirt roads, gravel roads. Would that number maybe even be even higher throughout the rest of the continent?
It's, some of the countries, especially in like Western Africa, there's very few, it's majority dirt roads, and a lot of it is not maintained. If you get into the Congo, it can get pretty hectic, pretty gnarly. But Northern Africa, Eastern Africa, they've got a lot of construction going on, so there's a lot of new roads built. But majority of Africa is, I think, safe to say, dirt roads.
Okay. When I think about Africa, the first thing that comes to mind for me is heat. So how are you able to combat maybe extreme temperatures when you're out there on a ride like that for a year?
So the time that I did it, I timed it so I was mostly in summer season all year long, from southern hemisphere to northern hemisphere. The extreme heat is mainly in the northern hemisphere when you get into the desert, into, like Morocco, Egypt, Tunisia, Libya. The rest of it is not really that bad. I think the highest I got up to was, what would it be, 100 degrees, maybe more.
Okay. And how many countries did you ultimately travel through on this one?
So it was 28 countries in total, but that includes, so from Morocco, I had to get into Europe because you can go from Morocco to Algeria because their land border has been locked for, I don't know, over a decade. So you have to hop on a ferry, go over to Europe, and then hop back on a ferry to either Algeria or Tunisia. So in total, African countries, I went through 25 and 3 European countries.
Other than just not having a lot of experience riding the bike, did you have any fear or apprehension before setting out?
Oh, yeah. I mean, obviously being a woman alone going around Africa, I had lots of fears, fear of the unknown, not knowing what to expect, especially in Western Africa. There are some dangerous areas, but, as you go along, you learn that those fears are not as realistic as we make it out in our own minds. Honestly, most of the people that I crossed were very friendly, very hospitable, very welcoming. And by the time I got to Western Africa, after I'd gone through about, 5 countries, you get so used to this way of life of being on the road and being more open to people approaching you. And I honestly have to say, majority of the time, 99% of the time, people wanted to protect me more than anything else.
Okay. What about language barrier? Any issues with that?
So I learned French before I left because most of Western Africa and Northern Africa is French. So I could get by. That was fine. But you know what? Language is not a big issue. You always find a way to carry across what it is that you need. Sign language or drawing something or using, these days with technology, you can use Google Translate. I've had full-on conversations on Google Translate. So there's always a way. Language is not an issue.
Yeah, it seems like technology is really opening up, opportunities to do things like you've just done here. It's amazing. I'm going to borrow a question that I asked from an episode with Kinga, who I know that you ran into.
Yes.
So when you're out there, and again, you're solo, you're on your own, is anything going through your mind, or what's going through your mind?
I think everything and nothing on some days. Some days it's you're just focused on where you're going and getting to where you're going, depending on where you are. You think of so many things. And I guess as a woman, you think of even more stuff. You know how busy our minds are. You think about the obstacles laying ahead, or what you might experience in the next country, and where you're going to sleep tonight, and visas that you need, going through countries, logistics. You think about what are you going to do when you finish the trip, and some days you just don't think about anything and just enjoy the journey.
Yeah. So speaking about finishing the trip, I got to ask, did you want it to end when it was starting to wind down?
It was tough. I was in two minds, when I was getting nearing the end of the journey. On the one hand, I wanted to just carry on. On the other hand, I missed seeing my friends and family, and it was a nice thought to think about getting back home. It was, the only regret that I have is the last 3 countries. I rushed through those 3 countries too much. And because I wanted to get to the end, I had this goal that I wanted to achieve, and it was right there. And I think the hardest part was once I finished, because for such a long time I'd been like a dog chasing a bus, and then I finally caught the bus, and then I was like, okay, well, now what? For a year I got so used to this way of living out of a few bags, being on the road every day. It's such a simple way of living. So once I finished, I felt a bit lost. It was a bit like, okay, now what do I do now?
Yeah, I can imagine you're moving along kind of at your own will for a year, and then suddenly one day it just stops. That's got to be a tough transition.
It is, because once you get back home, all of a sudden, responsibilities start piling on again, and it's like, oh my gosh, I miss being on the road and being free and not having to worry. My biggest worry was where I was going to sleep, get food, and that's it.
Pretty basic stuff, yeah.
Yeah, very basic stuff.
Now you're back. Technology, bills, whatever, right? I mean, day-to-day stuff, the boring stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
What would you say was like the most prized possession you had when you were traveling? The thing that you used the most or valued the most, aside from your bike, obviously?
Besides the bike, I think keepsakes, little gifts that people gave me as I went along. I still have all of it. Like every country I went through, I bought a bracelet that I still have. When I went through Northern Africa, it was at a very difficult time because it was during the Arab Spring. Just politically and from a security point of view, it was very tough getting through Northern Africa. And I must say that the governments of the Northern African countries really helped out so much, because they heard about what I was doing and my mission, and they came on board and helped with providing me with places to stay, making sure that I was safe traveling through the country, and even giving me like little plaques commemorating my journey going through like Egypt. Every town I got to, the governor of that town would present me with a plaque with my name on it, and so those are quite special. It's I still have all of it.
Now, I heard you on another podcast, and you mentioned that you collect knives, and you'd receive some knives too along the way.
Yes, I love knives, and I received quite a few along the way. But it got me into trouble when I got to Egypt, because it is the only land border that you go through where they actually X-ray your luggage. So you can imagine my bag going through an X-ray, and all they see is knives.
What is she planning? I can imagine.
Yeah, I actually got detained at that border for 9 hours under questioning. I eventually just told them to take the knives.
Oh, bummer. I want to talk about borders because I just recently interviewed some people who were riding through South America, and they actually spent 3 days at one border, dealing with paperwork and so on and so forth. Did you have any issues with border crossings other than the 9 hour stint there with the knives?
Like the Western African borders can be quite tricky. There's a lot of corruption going on some of the border posts, and also, again, you have guys who try and they have scams running at certain border posts. You have to be careful of that. You have to be careful of your possessions, your money. But overall, the main thing is just, time spent at border posts. Libya to Egypt was the longest one. That was 9 hours. And just running around, with paperwork. It's a bit tricky when you're a solo rider because you have to leave your bike and all your possessions behind whilst you sort out your paperwork. I think that was the greatest challenge for me. But after a while, you become like a well-oiled machine. You kind of figure out where you need to go, what you need to do, and you know what to look out for.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be tough to leave your stuff, especially if you know people or, we've all heard about people having things stolen at border crossings or having to bribe people. So that's tough.
Yeah, that's a tough one. My main thing was I refused to pay a bribe. And the thing is, I knew that I have all the time in the world, and I'm a super patient person. So when they tried to extort a bribe out of me, we would play the waiting game. And I was like, well, guys, I have a cent. I'll just pitch it right here.
So you and I are opposites. I would probably roll up to the border with money in my hand, clearly visible, being like, I got to get through here. Just let me get through here. I'm going to ask, this is probably a pretty stupid question, so forgive me, but you're out there riding through Africa, and we know lions, cheetahs, elephants. We only see those things over here in the United States in zoos, which I don't like. But did you see any wildlife like that on the ride?
Most of the countries, the wildlife will be kept inside like a park.
Okay.
So the only country really where you go through where it's not fenced is Botswana, which is a bordering country to South Africa. Most of the others the animals are fenced in, so they'll be in like big parks. So you don't really see them on the side of the road. The only country where I did see, obviously in like Northern Africa, you had camels walking across the road, that kind of thing. But the only other animals I saw was in Eastern Africa and Tanzania. I went through a park and it wasn't fenced. And they had like buffalo and zebra and some buck, but nothing like lions or cheetahs or anything that was going to chase me on my bike.
If you could, I know this was a year-long ride, but can you reflect on it and maybe recall your best day, where that was, what that was like?
Wow, my best day. I had a few of those. I don't think there was like one best day, except for the day that I finished. There were a few. I mean, if I had to maybe pick one out, there was when I entered Libya, it was very tricky because you cannot get a tourist visa for Libya. You can only enter on business. And it was at a time where, it was pretty much a war zone. And when I got to Tunisia, which is a neighboring country, they said to me, just don't go to Libya because, pretty much you're going to die. And my gut was just telling me I have to do this. I cannot skip it because it would be like cheating. And by some miracle, I met some military guys in the military in Libya who had friends in Tunisia, or met them in Tunisia. They had friends in Libya, and they started communicating, and they got in touch with the Libyan Motorcycling Federation, which I didn't even know Libya had a motorcycling federation. And they in turn got in touch with the Minister of Tourism of Libya, who happened to be a woman. And it was only by personal invite that I could actually enter the country. And when I got to Libya, when I got to the border, they had sent like the whole motorcycling club from their capital city to meet me at the border. And they surprised me at the border and welcomed me into their country. And it was pretty special, especially being a Westerner entering a Muslim country and a woman on a bike alone. And they were so respectful of me and made sure that I was safe and rode with me through the country. Well, not through the entire country. And I remember getting to a shop where I wanted to just buy, a few things like some snacks and cold drink and food. And when I got to the pay point, wanting to pay for my goods, the owner of the shop said in Arabic, he refused to take my money, and he just said, "Welcome to Libya."
Mm.
And, it's those kind of experiences that stand out more than anything else.
Interesting. Okay. When you reflect on the ride as a whole, did it become more about people, the people you met, the people who were hospitable, or again, was it just kind of the ride itself?
Initially, I thought the focus would be more on the ride. But as I progressed, through all these countries, it became more and more about the people. And in the end, it was all about the people and the experiences and the interactions that made it so much more special.
Do you believe the ride may have changed you as a person or even reshaped your beliefs?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I don't think you can, go on a ride like that and not have it change you. I think if you don't change as a person, then you did something wrong on the ride, because it's such a life-changing experience. I mean, you get to see so many things, different cultures, different countries, different beliefs, and going through sometimes hardships, being on your own. And it definitely changes you. It made me a stronger person. When I started out, I was I had so many fears and so many, maybe I think I would say prejudices. But at the end of it, I remember the day that I finished, when I got to the finish line, the one thing that stood out for me was, I had this immense feeling of I'm not afraid anymore. I had experienced so much, and it taught me that, I'm capable of absolutely anything I set my mind to, and that's true for anyone.
Yeah, very, very inspiring too. Yeah, I mean, if you're able to pull off a feat like that, I don't know what could stand in your way moving forward, right?
Exactly.
Again, referencing my interview with the couple that rode through South America, they had bike issues. They were 2 to 3 weeks out on getting something, apart if they're lucky. Would you say that's kind of the same thing for the ride that you were on?
I was very lucky. I didn't have any issues with my bike. So I serviced it, by myself. And I never had an issue with finding, anything that I needed to maintain the bike. The only time I had to wait for anything was when the rear suspension in my bike went in Kenya. I then had to wait for a spare to be shipped up from South Africa to Kenya, and that took about a week. Fixed it, and then I was on my way again. So I think if I had to compare South America to Africa, I think it's maybe a little more difficult to get stuff in South America, where in Africa, you have some main hubs where, I planned it that way. Like before I left, I did a bit of research and checked which countries had BMW dealerships. So I knew where I could get parts and then planned accordingly.
Okay. But again, no major issues with the BMW regardless. So I guess that's a ringing endorsement for those machines again.
Yeah, I mean, that's, little Rotax motor on the Dakar really is like unbreakable. That thing just would not stop. It was a really good bike to do the trip on. I really had no mechanical issues.
Okay. And you're riding a 790 now, right?
Yeah. So when I got back home, when I finished the trip, I became brand ambassador for BMW Motorrad. And then I was with them for a couple of years. And then last year, KTM approached me, and now I've moved over to the dark side.
Uh-oh.
So I'm now KTM brand ambassador since November last year.
Okay. How do you think do you think you would have enjoyed riding your 790 on the same trip? I think the answer is obvious, but I'll go ahead and ask.
Yeah, so not because I have to say it, but absolutely. So my boyfriend and I are actually planning to carry on and do a round the world trip.
Oh,
So in 2 years' time, we're planning to pack up and start in South America, and we're going to be on to 790 Adventure R's. And the plan is to start in Argentina and, make our way up through the States, Alaska, and just carry on. The idea is not to come back.
never.
Never. Just
Okay.
ride for as long as we can.
When you set your mind to something, it's usually big. That's crazy. Have you ever been to the States? Have you been to the States yet?
I haven't. I have so many friends in the States. I've had a lot of clients from the States as well come to South Africa on some of my tours. So, when I came back, so here's the funny thing. So I went around Africa, came back, and then I went for rider training. And then the the instructor that trained me actually said to me, would you be interested in becoming an instructor? And I was like, wow, I never thought about that. And turned out that I was actually pretty good at it. And then I became an internationally qualified instructor through BMW, Germany. And I've been doing instructing in tours since. So for a couple of years now. So the idea is when we do this round the world trip, I'll carry on with, offering off-road instructing, and definitely in the States as well, because I have so many friends and followers and clients in the States.
So you're going to come up, you're going to ride the Pan American up to Alaska. You got Asia on the agenda at any point or anything like that?
Yeah. So, I mean, we haven't even looked at a set route yet, but definitely, I guess from Alaska, we'll go over to Siberia, through Russia, do Asia, Europe, go down to probably Australia. The idea is to take our time and to experience as much as we can.
Okay. Back to the KTM Ambassador work. What does that entail for you nowadays?
Yeah, so I am now on a KTM 790 Adventure. I'm on the S model. So basically all that means is that, so I test out the bikes and obviously promote the brand. I still give training and tours, although my training and tours are open to all adventure motorcycle makes and models. But I'm just on a KTM, so I just represent the brand.
So riding around Africa, 28 different countries, did you ultimately end up with a favorite country or favorite place that you stayed?
There were a few. It's always so tough, I just cannot choose one. There were so many beautiful countries, because it's such a big continent and so many countries. There's so much diversity. You go from desert to jungle to mountains to valleys to it's just amazing. And I think if I have to choose my top three, I would say Angola was one of my favorite countries, and Morocco, and what else? Ethiopia is very beautiful.
Really?
It's a very beautiful country, like mountains, valleys, lush green, very beautiful country. Apart from South Africa, of course, I have to say that South Africa.
Partial to South Africa.
We have a very beautiful country.
Yeah, and like I said, we got a ringing endorsement here. I just talked to Harold, and he's like, "Wow, that place is so amazing to ride." So, we're gonna have to put it on the list. Kind of last big question about your ride before we start to close this out. And maybe this is a tough one to answer, but greatest takeaway from that year spent on the bike.
Greatest takeaway. I think my greatest takeaway was that, just generally speaking, I realized that, we tend to, as people, we tend to hold back on, the things that we really want to do or our biggest dreams because we think we're not capable, or you are afraid of failing, or you don't know where to start. And my biggest takeaway was, if you want to do something, it's a cliche. We always say you only get one life, but it's only a cliche because it's so true. And we waste so much time worrying about failing that we end up not doing the things that we want to do. So my biggest takeaway from that was just do it. Just do it. Even if you don't know how, just, take the first step and then the next step and just go for it.
Yeah, and I think that's really valuable advice. The older I get, the more I kind of step into this realization that the time's limited. You don't think about that stuff when you're 20, but as I approach 40 here, I'm like, I don't know how many great years I have left, and there's a lot of stuff that I want to do, so you can't really hold back.
Well, that's the thing, it's I think there's that saying that you only regret, what is the saying? You regret 99% of things that you didn't do and only 1% of the things that you did do. Something like that.
Yeah, I wouldn't argue with you there. And I've told people before, when lying on my deathbed or however that goes down, I don't think you want to be sitting there recalling a bunch of regrets or I wish I would have done this or that,
Well, that's the thing, I don't want to end up one day saying, I wish I did that. I wish I made time for the things that I wanted to do. I just don't want to end up with regrets.
Yeah. And that's why this story is inspiring. To ride around Africa, and now you're going to go around the world. And that's amazing. And again, very inspiring. Can you give us your website and the name of your book so people know where to find you and how to look you up?
Yeah, sure. So people can find the book downloads on my website. So the website is jorustadventures.com. So it's JORUST adventures.com.
Okay. And then I got the book off Amazon, but you prefer us to get it from your site?
Yeah, so the link to the Amazon page is on my website, so it's just easier for people to find it off my website. And since, the whole COVID-19 outbreak, since everyone's gone into quarantine, I actually made it available as a free download on my website for the time being.
Okay, well, that's very thoughtful. While we're talking about it, how has COVID impacted South Africa?
Oh, it has been tough. So it's been 3 months now that we've been under lockdown. So our government has implemented like a 5-stage strategy. We've moved from level 5 to level 4. Now we're on level 3. So level 5, we couldn't move around at all. You weren't allowed to leave your home. Well, only certain hours. You could only go out for essential goods. Now we're starting to get kind of back to normal. Still, the restaurants are still closed. Gyms are still closed. But we're able to go out and do some work. You're not allowed to go over like state lines or provincial borders. It's been tough. I think for everyone, the whole world has had to adapt to this. But slowly but surely, we're kind of getting back to normal now.
Yeah, it's starting to return to normal here in the States, but then now we're dealing with some riots and protests, and I see the number of new cases is climbing again. I mean, I'm sure you guys can see the stuff on the news, so I'm not really sure where we're headed here. We're in a tough spot right now for sure over here.
Yeah, so we watch CNN every day.
Oh,
so
yeah, I'm not gonna ask what you think of us over here in America. We gotta get it together over here. We're a mess over here.
I think everyone feels the same way. It's not just you guys. Don't worry. It's the whole world.
All right. That makes me feel a little bit better. But Joe, I appreciate your time. You got any parting shots or anything you want to say before I let you go?
No, thank you so much for having me. I mean, I really enjoyed it. And I think, the main thing, like I said to anyone listening, go out, live your dreams and, have no regrets.
Couldn't have said it better myself, listeners. Thank you, Joe Rust, for joining the podcast. Again, at joe.rust on Instagram, and really appreciate your story. And, the cold hard truth, go out there, just do it, have no regrets, and chase your dreams. I think that's what I took away from that podcast. And it's always good to have that reminder. Thanks, Joe. All right, listeners, I'm about to skate out of here. I have a bunch of prep work to do in order to go riding here for about a week. So we've got Dork in the Road coming up on the next podcast, and I believe I will release that this upcoming Sunday because I'll basically be out of the state by then. But yeah, Pacific Northwest native, YouTube creator, and it's a very entertaining podcast. So you guys don't want to miss that. Again, Dork in the Road on YouTube and at a Dork in the Road on Instagram. That podcast is coming up next time.